The battle between policy versus ethics and morality. I'm Jordan Knox. We're in a case study, doing a case study, and we're in module 14, the last one. So the background of this case study is three main characters. We got a first-year principal by the name of Richard Iman. Then we have one troubled student named James. He's 15 years old. And we have one standout student named David Ramos. He's 13. So the background of the story, in a nutshell, is principal has been spending time with James. He's a trouble student, and he's been helping him build a relationship and actually helping James behave turn for the best. James had to be called into the office this past week for a tardy issue. Meanwhile, he was in the office. His fifth period teacher uh, reported some suspicious activity between him and another student, which is David. So the SRO brings David in, and both boys gets questioned about what happened in the hallway. Uh, James spoke up and said, David is just holding something for me. The officer turned his attention to David, and David folded, started crying. So the officer found a pair of brass knuckles on him. And due to the board policies, zero tolerance rules, the boys got suspended for 45 days in an alternative school, and they were arrested and sent to a detention center. The principal didn't feel too good about that because David was never in trouble, was a excellent student, standout student, and initially he didn't fill out the paperwork. So he was morally conflicted, and he just didn't know what to do, so he didn't fill out the paperwork at first. Then he got called by the director of secondary um, education, told him to file the expulsion. So David ended up doing his time at the alternative school, and that's the background of the story in a nutshell. So the legal or ethical issues. Uh, Legal issues. Basically, Mr. Eamon didn't follow his contract of carrying out his job by enforcing, the district policy rules, as well as involving an SR officer. Ethical conflicts he faced was initially reporting David's expulsion papers, and he was also ethically proud and morally proud of James for fessing up that he was going to physically harm David if he didn't hold the brass knuckles. James decided to threaten a victim and have brass knuckles at first, but ethically he spoke up about it and shows that he was growing and didn't want anything happen to David. David, legal issues he had was just concealing brass knuckles. This case study demonstrates the legal and ethical difficulties from an assistant principal involving two students on different behavioral spectrums being reprimanded by a district zero tolerance policy. The concrete facts of the case. Uh, the people that were involved, we got the assistant principal. This is his first year, like mentioned before. And we have James, a 15-year-old, heavily tattooed group leader, history of trouble and violence. Explains the brass knuckles. Uh, then we have David Ramos. He's 13 years old, standout student, like mentioned before. Never been reprimanded, never been in trouble. Nothing on his record. Then we have the fifth period teacher. Then we have a police officer, the SRO officer. Then we have James' mother, David's mother, and the director of secondary education. The mothers kind of played an essential part in the case study because they showed the background and environment those two boys came from. The mother didn't have James's mother didn't have too much of a concern of James' behavior. She thought it was do him good, which I can understand a little bit, staying in jail for a little bit, or the detention facility a little bit. And David's mother showed high concern for her child, and she was up at school in 15 minutes figuring out why her child was in trouble, even though the other child fessed up for doing wrong. So the setting, we have Rocket Junior High, small population school, only had 9 students. The initial event took place in a hallway, and majority of the time the students were in the office of the principal. The other settings were the detention facility and alternative school. The program, this was a secondary school, and I'm assuming the grades were possibly 8th through 10th because of the ages, and it was named junior high. So I just took it upon myself to condense those grades. It was a small school, did not specify on any school-related programs of so like it wasn't a tech school, science-based school, fine arts school. Just said junior high. Unknown facts and concerns. Some concerns. I do have some concerns about this. My first concern, I feel like there wasn't enough of a thorough investigation of this case study. Uh, in all high schools and schools nowadays, for safety reasons, there's cameras. I feel like if the situation happened in the hallway, that the cameras should have been the first thing addressed in this situation, just to see if there was any body language of bullying or if the initial behavior from David was accepting in that he could have been part of James's group. To stem off of number one, I feel like we should have done a better investigation with the teacher to get more questions involved and see if she saw more than just an exchange. Number two, the head principal never got involved in the situation. Something to that magnitude, I feel like the head principal should have been consulted, especially with the weapon and the mention of bullying. And number three, like mentioned before, what if David could have been a part of the group and used his good image to hide? You know, he could have been very well part of the group. He just took his school serious, and the other boys didn't. But outside of school, he could have been part of that affiliated group. Section 5. This situation could be damaging to the stakeholders or the community. Yes, it could have been damaging. Very damaging to the school's culture, I believe, if Mr. Emmon did not address this in the proper way. It could set the bar that certain students can get away with certain things and just get slaps on the wrist. But if you got a track record, and I mean, that's how life works sometimes, which is sad. But there's not showing any equal consequences for the students. So there should be, the students have to know what's right and what's wrong, and that could be damaging. What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Number one, Mr. Emmon, he can lose his job if he did not proceed with the expulsion. David and his family could have a negative effect on their future, could put a damper on David's potential. Like mentioned before, could affect David individually if he truly was bullied and just mess up his whole future and track record. James, it actually could have a positive effect on James, even though he done something bad. It can give him a reality check by showing his actions can affect innocent people heading in a better direction. Let me correct myself. I said it could affect David individually if he truly wasn't bullied. So meaning that he could have been a part of James's group and then he could get exposed. Have all the relevant stakeholders been consulted? I don't think so. I said the teacher that reported the situation. There could have been more of an investigation with her. The parents were called. Should have been called first concerning the situation, and the head principal was never consulted. I feel like I could learn more about the situation before making a decision, before determining what I would do with these 2 students, especially David. Possible options I would have and consequences. Option number 1 would be turning the case over to the principal, taking the heat off myself if I was conflicted, like Mr. Inman. Option number 2 is just follow the board policy and proceed with the procedures. And option number 3, I have 3 subpoints: not file the paperwork, propose a policy change, and raise bully awareness. The pros and cons of these: option number one, if I turn it over to the principal, it shows that pro could be it allows me to learn and handle situation for future reference. Just seeing how they go about certain situations and how to critically think, and make a decision on spot. It will help a lot, especially being a first year assistant principal. The con: it may show others you are not fit to make difficult decisions, which could be bad being an assistant principal. Option number 2, just follow the board policy and proceed with the expulsion. It will show you are compliant with policy and show equal treatment of students as a pro. And C, you could jeopardize our students' future by not further investigation in this situation. Number 3, not file the paperwork. Could show that you're standing up for the student, shows mindset students first. And the con of that could be you lose your job, show favoritism among students, and show students that you're easy. You don't enforce the rules. The pros of policy change: it raises awareness, but it may take long to help David, but it wouldn't help him in this situation. It will help future victims. Raise bullying awareness. It gives students the resources and just tools to know when and where to speak up and who to go to protect themselves for situations like this. And see, the con of that, it ultimately doesn't get rid of bullying. The best option is for the scenario, like I said, for me, I feel like the best scenario would have been involving the head principal, then following it up with option 2. So to turn the case over to principal, let them take lead and you assist. It allows you to learn and handle the situation properly, and it'll help you make future decisions. Then number 2, you just follow the board policy and proceed with the expulsion in spite of the clean slate of David. Section: implementation. I would consult principal, study the decision making, how to go about the situation to see what steps are taken. Proceed with filing the paperwork and procedure and going back later to counsel for future situations. The principal is your best friend. He's your boss and will tell you how to handle a situation, he or she. And follow board policy, explain the policy to students and parents, fill out proper paperwork, execute the expulsion, and contact the director to inform that paperwork is filled out correctly, and contact the alternative school to inform David's history. And that is my standards. So appreciate it, and thank you for listening.